Well, good evening. Let's see here. Okay, here we go. Thank you. And tonight we're requesting adoption of the Parks and Recreation Master Plan 2013, and just in time so we can get this thing through before it expires. It's taking forever to get here. Anyway, for those that have seen this numerous times, sorry, and those that haven't, this should be interesting, and I'll go through the areas that don't need a lot of attention fairly quickly, and those that need attention will slow down, but please feel free to ask questions as we go along. So I'll start out here with the purpose of the plan. It's twofold, and one's to determine the community's current and future needs, and the second is to establish an adopted, systemized approach to our park planning and development. And let's see here, make sure we're working. There we go. And this is long and busy, but needless to say, back in May of 2007 is when we started this, and going all the way to the bottom for adoption. And lots of meetings, a lot of citizen involvement. From the very beginning, we had a consultant working with us for a while as well. Various commissions giving their input, lots of staff, lots of citizens, as well as our liaisons that we've had from the councils. And this plan has 6 chapters going from purpose and need, goals, objectives, our inventory, our standards, our assessments, and the implementation. In our appendices, we have the survey results, our park assessments, playground guidelines, funding sources, and down the road, and hopefully not very far future, we'll have our capital projects priority and funding forecast, and that is already, we have a bunch of it done, but we're still waiting on some additional numbers, as well as run this through the Parks and Rec Commission before we bring that through, and then we would ask for an amendment to the master plan and add that as a capital, or as an appendix. We have maps in here, the various parks and their service areas, including the pathway system. And on my computer, this just looked a lot bigger, but and my eyes aren't dilated. So the importance of the plan, it's investing in our community's livability and quality of life, its desirable image of Moscow, our contribution to a healthful community life, which you were hitting on just a little bit ago with Paradise Path, are providing facilities for our various activities and recreational needs, establishing a systemized criteria for the development of our parks. We have a lot of properties that are undeveloped and really no plan of how to get those taken care of. Providing diverse areas and facilities in close proximity, in other words, convenience for the citizens. If it's convenient, they will go there. And preserving valued open spaces and sensitive lands. I like numbers and things like that, little charts and gizmos, especially those that people don't understand, because then I sound better when I'm talking about it. This here is our projected future population, and basically, this is for the city of Moscow, back from 1970 out to 2030, and you can see the line is fairly steady depending on which formula they used. And the main thing was just to show that there is at least projected steady growth. It's not fast, but it's steady. Age distribution in Moscow, I threw this in. I just thought it was interesting that you could see male on the left, female on the right, and the ages Of course, the primary or the bulk of the ages are in the 20 to 44. I think that's 20. I can't read it. 20 to 44, and of course you have lots of families and students, college students in that category. But in Parks and Rec, our primary focus on programs has just traditionally been the younger people. So this just helps us to know that maybe we're missing some folks there, or at least to concentrate our understanding of what's offered and what's not to other populations or age groups. Busy slide. No doubt you saw this in the plan, but just wanted to show it briefly. This is our inventory, and it shows developed and undeveloped properties, as well as the type of parks and facilities that we have and how they're categorized. And it does include the school district properties. So I won't go into a lot of detail on that, but just to show you real quickly. Our park condition assessment. Now, I'm going to show you a second slide on this. Just some, a point that was brought to me just today. The way that the verbiage is, as it explains this, was a little bit confusing. The score 4 meaning it needs a lot of improvement. Zeros are supposed to be good, but we have several items in here where it's not applicable, so it should have an NA. And so I will show you that real quickly. And in the end here, I will explain that this is a change that I would like you to include in the adoption. So this does include the change in the mathematics, but there's not a significant difference, but it does show that some of those zeros just really weren't applicable. And here's our needs assessments, and so you can see where we have our current system and where we're deficit or overages, as well as when we get to 2030, where that would predict, at least by the projected populations, where we would be. And then our facilities assessments, kind of the same thing. These don't necessarily mean these are things that will happen. There are some things that a community will decide they just don't want to have. But based on standards through the National Recreation and Park Association, we show these and where the City of Moscow fits within those standards.
So Dwight, I saw in some of our backup you had a reference to like BMX courses, and then we're hearing a lot more about disc golf and some of those. We've had a couple people, I've met with some people here in the last week, as you know.
Yeah.
So is that a place where those things would show up, or are they just not?
The cyclocross, which is what those guys were referring to, is new, and it is not in the standards.
Okay,
so
disc
BMX
golf?
and things like that. Frisbee golf is also not in the standards, and it's also one of those areas that's starting to fade in popularity. They're relative, other than you do get complaints because of being hit by Frisbees as you're out trying to walk and do your dog things and all that. They fit into most larger parks and are without a lot of intrusion, and they're low cost, but they're very active sports, and those that do like them, just like golf, are diehards. And we had explored Frisbee golf some years back, and I'm not sure, it just kind of petered out, the discussion on it, but they have a pretty extensive one over on the university campus.
Well, what caught my attention was the fellow who approached me is actually the instructor for both WSU and the University of Idaho, apparently, and so they have an active student program. And then the reference on our documents here was to BMX and the bikes, but we didn't mention cyclocross, and I think those are kind of different things too. So thanks.
Yes, but in general, I mean, these things are fairly subjective. I mean, you can, as names change, as sports evolve, you know, it used to be downhill skiing. You had 2 skis, and now it's snowboarding and everything else.
I still do, Dwight. I still
So,
have 2.
You know, well, I have 3, and it hasn't helped.
All right, yeah.
But anyway, so it's just things to look at, as well as new opportunities as they come up, as new sports come up. And then, of course, equipment needs assessments. A lot of these are fairly easy fixes to bring us in within compliance. These are based on standards that aren't necessarily applicable. A discussion we had, I had today with somebody was parking spaces, for example. Based on standards, you might need more parking spaces, but it might be a park that really doesn't require any parking spaces, maybe some roadside parking, things like that. But it's just based on the standards. So as each park or property is evaluated, you need to look at those kinds of things. Just because the standard's there doesn't mean it should be there for that particular property.
Tom?
On that last slide where it says bicycle rack,
Yes.
is it, is the number for the standard in reference to the number of places to park a bike, or is it in reference to the number of structures that you put the bike onto?
I believe it's the structures, the actual racks themselves. I don't know off the top of my head what the standard is of how many spaces, or, you know, spaces for bikes per rack, though.
I'm thinking about like development standards. We have certain requirements for actual places where cars can be parked, like number of spots. It would be nice to have a translatable or a transferable number that corresponds to the number of places where bikes can be
Sure.
put, rather than
We should be able to pull that out of,
that would be.
of
I think
what's
that
there.
would be a helpful.
And I think with
A
that too, it
comparison.
would be case by case as well. There's some places you wouldn't necessarily have
Right.
bikes, but yeah, I think we can pull that those numbers out
Would
of
be
the
helpful to-
standard. Yeah.
Okay, and Dwight, we just heard from the Paradise Path Task Force as a linear park in part, and I could see one of the conversations we're having, Margaret mentioned Blackbird Crossing, and that's a site where we'd have a drinking fountain, for example. And I'm wondering about a linear park system and any standards for, you know, places for rehydration per mile or anything like that? No standards?
No, not on the national standards, but that doesn't mean they're not being looked at. Matter of fact, the entire standard system is currently being reviewed. They do it every so many years as things become more popular or more focused on. They start looking at new standards. So it wouldn't surprise me to see that when the updates come out.
I'm looking forward to it. Sue, you had your hand up.
Oh, I was just saying, the way I'm reading this is that, and I think that's a 1 after bicycle rack, so that looks like a half of a bicycle rack per acre in a pocket park. Is that the way I read that? Is that what that means?
Yes.
Okay.
And of course, that's just doing math. It's
Yeah,
not necessarily.
Per acre, but
I
it's
mean,
just how many racks
we would put
per
a whole
acre.
rack in there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, it's only for a unicycle. No, I was just trying to translate, that's all.
Yeah. The main thing here is to show that these have been looked at and that we would work to try to resolve any deficiencies where it's applicable. I'll go through the maps just very quickly here. This is an overall park system. These are our pocket parks, and you can see the shaded areas. So the primary thing to get out of this is what's not covered. As you get into neighborhood parks, the walkability or the distance to travel to them is bigger. Community parks such as East City Park, you don't have to have very many that cover a lot of ground for coverage. And then, of course, the pathway system.